The lace on her wedding dress was older than she was. Yellowed at the seams, frayed at the cuffs, the fabric whispered of decades and memories too fragile to carry. Adelaide Monroe stood alone at the altar of the old stone chapel in Tombstone, Arizona, framed by sunlight so sharp it could slice. Her spine was straight. Her chin was lifted. Her hands that trembled just enough to betray the storm inside. The pews behind her were filled with faces, some curious, some pitying, some hiding poorly stifled grins. No one spoke aloud, but the whispers clung to the walls like heat. She should have known better. 62 and still chasing wedding bells. Desperate doesn't even begin to cover it. The groom was gone. No note, no excuse. Just a trail of boot prints leading out the chapel's back door, and a town full of tongues already wagging. One man snorted and spat into the dust outside. A woman nearby shook her head and muttered, "She came all the way from Flagstaff for this." Adelaide didn't cry. Her jaw set like iron beneath the soft veil. She gave them no scandal, no tears, no drama, just silence and then motion. She turned from the altar, lifted her train off the floor, and walked down the aisle alone. The chapel doors creaked open as she passed, and the sun swallowed her like a judgment. Under the wooden awning across the street, Callum Reeves leaned against a support post, arms crossed, a sack of grain at his feet. He hadn't come for a wedding. He came for hinges and nails. But something about the woman in white walking like a ghost who refused to vanish rooted him to the spot. He'd buried his wife 7 winters ago beneath a twisted juniper tree that bloomed too late every spring. She'd worn white too, though her dress was sewn from old curtains and stubborn love. Adelaide looked nothing like her, and yet something in her stillness spoke to a grief he understood. As the crowd spilled out and broke into murmurs and smirks, Callum turned back toward his wagon. But then he saw her again, sitting alone on the chapel steps, veil crumpled in her lap like discarded hope. She was humming something low, tuneless, her back straight, her eyes dry but red. "Ma'am," he said under his breath, surprised that his boots were already carrying him closer. She didn't look up, not until he repeated it louder. "Ma'am." She raised one eyebrow expression flat. "You here to gawk like the rest of them?" "No, just figured I'd say, I don't think you deserved that." Her laugh was dry as mesquite bark. "Save your pity, it wrinkles worse than I do." He almost smiled. "I wasn't offering pity, maybe a sandwich. You hungry?" She studied him, eyes sharp like a tax ledger. "You from Tombstone? Outskirts, little ranch past the Santa Rita foothills. Ain't much, but it's mine. You always this charming to strangers in ruined lace. No, ma'am, usually worse." Adelaide stood brushing off her dress like it still mattered. "Well, then, Mr. Rancher, thank you for the offer. But I managed just fine. Always have." He tipped his hat, ready to leave, but she said nothing else. As he loaded the last bag into his wagon, the storekeeper leaned over and muttered, "That lady groom ran off with her gold, all of it. Left town last night. Folks think she's touched in the head. 62, still dreaming of a husband. Should have stayed in Flagstaff." Callum didn't answer, but the words followed him like dust. On his way out of town, just beyond the last row of buildings, he spotted her again, walking along the trail, slow but steady, dragging her wedding train behind her like the tail of a ghost. He didn't stop right away. It took him a full minute before he sighed hard, pulled the wagon to the side, and called out, "You headed anywhere in particular?" She didn't stop walking. "Away. That's a direction, not a destination. Place don't matter," she said. "Wherever I go, they've already got a story about me. Might as well be a new one." He stepped down from the wagon. "I got a ranch that needs cleaning, a boy that needs raising, and meals to be made. Ain't offering love, just a roof and honest work." She stopped, turned. You always propose to strangers in the dirt. Didn't say anything about marriage. She squinted at him. Good, after today I'm off weddings. They stared at each other for a long beat. Two people shaped by silence and scars. Names Callum Reeves. Adelaide Monroe, call me Addie. He nodded toward the wagon. Well, Addie, ride up front or hang on back, up to you. She climbed aboard, gathering her dress into her lap, and settled beside him with a sigh. Guess this counts as a honeymoon. Don't push your luck, he said, but his voice was gentler than before. As the wagon creaked forward and the town faded behind them, neither looked back. Ahead, the desert stretched wide and unknown. But between them, something old and aching had just begun to heal. The first morning on Callum Reeves' ranch began with a cracked egg and silence. Adelaide Monroe, still stiff in her shoulders, wore a faded apron over what had once been her wedding dress. The dress now hung on a hook by the door, crusted with trail dust and cactus spines, a relic of a version of herself she no longer answered to. Instead, she wore rolled sleeves and calloused intent. The boy, Emmett, eyed her from across the kitchen table. 10 years old, freckled, and already carrying the watchfulness of a man twice his age. He stabbed at his beans with a spoon and muttered something about strange women and old ghosts. Addie stirred the skillet like she'd been in that kitchen all her life, though every creak of the floorboards under her boots betrayed her newness. Callum leaned in the doorway, sipping his coffee, saying little. He was a man who let silence fill the gaps most folks tried to talk over. You always make breakfast this quiet? She asked, voice light but steady. Emmett shrugged. We ain't used to company. Well, I ain't company, I'm work. That got a side-eye and a grunt. Addie spent the day learning the landscape. The ranch sat nestled in a valley outside Santa Rita, with rust-colored cliffs in the distance, and a creek that only remembered to run half the year. There were chickens to feed a leaky barn roof to patch, and a stubborn goat named Samson who clearly hated her on principle. She didn't mind. The goat's resistance made her feel more at home. She claimed a room in the back of the house, small and shaded, and cleaned it with a vengeance that felt like reclaiming something. She unpacked a single satchel inside a worn journal, a brooch shaped like a lily, and a few herbs she'd dried herself. That night, she started a garden patch near the south fence, dropping seeds like prayers into the soil. Callum watched from the porch. You're planting. Only way to see tomorrow is to start something today. He nodded, but said nothing more. Days passed in that rhythm work, dust heat, and the slow truce of proximity. Addie fixed the shutters on the chicken coop, taught Emmett how to stitch a torn shirt, and coaxed the mule back into its harness after it had given up on cooperating with men. She wasn't soft, but she was steady, and the land began to make room for her. One evening after supper, Emmett sat by the fire with a dog-eared book. Addie leaned over, her voice quiet but firm. You like reading. I like shootouts and outlaws. I like survivors. He frowned. Aren't they the same sometimes? But not always. She read with him, her voice smoothing the edges of the printed page. Callum watched from the shadows, a part of the house now still and quiet but taking it all in. That night he lingered after Emmett went to bed. You settle in all right? He asked. I settle where I'm needed. He hesitated, then said, I meant what I said. You don't owe me nothing. If you want to go, I'm not going, she cut in. You gave me a roof. I'll give you what I've got. They didn't speak again that night, but the silence between them had shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. The next morning, a hawk circled overhead as Addie stood on the back porch, hands on her hips. She looked out across the ranch like she was measuring it, weighing its bones. Then she walked inside, grabbed a hammer, and began reinforcing the barn door. She did not ask. She did not explain. She simply did. That afternoon, a stranger passed by the property, dusty, lost, and asking for water. Callum met him at the fence. Addie watched from a distance, a rifle within reach. The man drank, tipped his hat, and left. But she didn't put the rifle down until long after his silhouette vanished over the ridge. "You expecting trouble?" Callum asked that evening. "Always? That's how you avoid being surprised." He chuckled. "You and my late wife would have got along fine." "I'm not her," Addie said, not unkindly. "I know, but I see the same steel." By week's end, the garden had sprouted, tiny shoots pushing up through stubborn soil, and Emmett had started leaving his books on the kitchen table where she could find them. He even asked her about herbs once, what healed, what stung, what did both. She answered each question without flinching. On Sunday, they didn't go to church. Instead, Addie walked into town to the dry goods store, her chin high, her steps steady. Whispers followed her, but she didn't hear them. She bought flour, salt, and fabric. When she passed the chapel, she paused, not out of pain, out of certainty. That chapter was closed. Back on the ranch, she hemmed new curtains for the boys' room, built a scarecrow with him out of old flannel, cooked soup that made Callum grunt with something resembling approval. "You planning to stay?" Emmett asked her one night. "I stay where I grow," she said. He nodded. "You're weird, but you make good cornbread." In a land known for wind and wildfire, Adelaide Monroe had begun to root. Not as a guest, not as a ghost, but as a force. The kind you didn't see coming. The kind you remembered. By late July, the desert heat was a living thing, breathing, pressing, watching. The days were heavy with sweat and the buzz of locusts, and even the goats seemed to walk slower. Addie had taken to wearing a wide-brimmed hat and tying a damp cloth around her neck, but the sun didn't care about precautions. It cracked the ground and peeled the paint from the barn. Callum was mending the fence line when the dust trail appeared. Thin at first, like a trick of light, then rising steady behind the silhouette of a rider coming in fast from the east trail. Addie noticed before he did. She was watering the garden knees in the dirt when her spine stiffened like a weather vane before a storm. Callum squinted into the sun. "Don't recognize the horse." Addie wiped her hands and reached for the rifle by the porch. "You recognize the rider." "Not yet." The man dismounted before the house, tall, wiry, with a face leathered by time and sun. His hat was pulled low, grin too wide to trust. A scar ran down his left cheek like a crooked river. Addie saw the way Callum's jaw clenched. "Callum Reeves," the stranger said, voice like boots scraping stone. "Been a long time. Burke, didn't think you'd recognize me. Didn't think you'd crawl out from whatever hole you died in." Burke laughed, slow and joyless. "Now that ain't friendly. I came for a catch-up. Maybe collect a little debt you still owe." Addie stepped closer, rifle low but ready. "You want to tell me what kind of debt needs collecting with a gun?" Burke tilted his head. "This your woman now. Heard the last one, died sick. Heard you left Prescott with a few holes in your wake." Callum's voice was flat. "You got 5 seconds to speak your piece. I ain't here for trouble." "Not yet," Burke said. "But you know how it works, Reeves. You owe. Old days, old blood. And the folks I work for now, they're less patient than I am." He tossed a folded slip of parchment onto the porch. "That's what you owe. You got till the next full moon. Pay or they come knocking." He mounted again, grinned once more. Nice little place. Shame if it burned. Addie didn't speak until the hoofbeats faded. Callum picked up the parchment, glanced at the figure. His hand trembled slightly. It's real. How real enough to make them come back. That night, Callum didn't eat. He sat at the edge of the porch, cigarette unlit, just rolling it between his fingers. Addie watched him from the doorway. "You never told me you were a man who left debts behind. I thought I left that part of me behind, too. Apparently, it rides faster than you do." He glanced up. "You blaming me, I'm standing here, ain't I?" In the following days, the house changed. Emmett was taught how to spot riders from the North Ridge. Addie moved her garden tools into the house and turned a shelf into a weapons rack. They took inventory, 2 rifles, a 6-shooter, and a scattergun that hadn't fired in years. Addie cleaned it like a priest preparing communion. "Been in shootouts before," Callum asked one evening. "Enough to know survival is more about the second shot than the first." The town began whispering again. Folks noticed when Callum bought extra ammunition and when Addie ordered lye and saltpeter. Sheriff Daniels paid a visit, but left quickly after seeing the steel in Addie's eyes and the way Emmett trailed behind her like a wary pup-turned-guardian. One afternoon, Emmett asked, "Are we gonna die?" Addie crouched beside him, her hands covered in flour. "Not today, but they're coming." "Maybe, but so is rain. Doesn't mean we don't patch the roof." Emmett nodded, processing. "You're not afraid. I'm scared to my bones," she said gently. "But fear isn't the same as weakness." The night before the full moon, Addie walked the perimeter with Callum. The stars were sharp, the silence tense. "I won't ask you what you did in Prescott," she said. "I did what I had to. Men died." "Then you already paid part of the debt?" "Maybe, but men like Burke don't believe in enough." Addie stopped walking. "Then we teach them a new gospel." They waited. Lanterns turned low. Firewood stacked by windows. Emmett hid in the crawlspace armed with a whistle and a small revolver he swore he could use. The riders came at midnight. 6 of them. Masks up, guns drawn. They circled the house torches, flaring in the dark. Burke called out, voice mocking. "Reeves, you in there, come out and bleed like a man." Callum stood by the front door, Addie behind a window, breath calm, fingers steady on the trigger. She fired first. The lead rider fell. Then chaos. Gunshots tore the quiet open. Flames licked the side of the barn. Burke shouted orders, but Addie moved like a shadow. Quick, clean, unrelenting. Callum fought with grim determination, every shot deliberate. But it was Addie who ended it. Burke tried to rush the porch, screaming, pistol raised. She met him at the top step. 1 shot, center mass. He fell like a sack of grain. When the smoke cleared, the survivors fled. Emmett emerged pale but unharmed. The barn had suffered. A chicken coop smoldered, but the house stood. Callum sat on the steps, hands shaking. "You all right, Addie?" Didn't answer right away. She looked out at the bodies, then back at him. "We don't run from ghosts, Callum. We bury them." He looked at her, then really looked. Not as the woman who'd come in a dress in defiance, but as the one who'd fought to keep something alive. He took her hand. She didn't pull away. In the stillness that followed, the ranch exhaled. The firelight flickered against their faces as they sat together on the porch, a new kind of silence settling over them. One born not of grief, but of survival. The ranch didn't sleep the night after the attack. Even as the last flames were stamped out and Burke's body buried under the ridge, the air remained taut with the scent of gunpowder and the weight of what might still come. Callum Reeves stood in the yard, hands-clenched, boots in blood-stained dirt, staring at the moon that had borne witness to it all. Adelaide Monroe walked past him holding a basin of water for Emmett, who had been quiet since crawling out from his hiding place. The boy's hands trembled as she wiped the soot and sweat from his cheeks. "You did right," she whispered. "You stayed still. You listened. That's braver than most grown men." He looked up at her with wide eyes. "Will they come back?" She didn't lie. Some always do. By morning, the ranch was quieter but not calm. The neighbors who hadn't come the night before came, now curious, concerned, or opportunistic. Sheriff Daniels arrived too slow and reluctant, riding a tired horse and offering more questions than help. He looked at the graves in the scorched wood, then at Addie and Callum. "You sure you handled this legal?" Addie met his gaze flatly. "If we hadn't handled it, we'd be dead." Daniels grunted. "Just saying there'll be eyes. Maybe folks from Tucson, maybe federal. A woman firing shots like that, people talk." "I hope they talk loud," she replied. "Maybe it'll keep the next devils away." After the sheriff left, Addie walked the land. She wasn't looking for threats, she was feeling the soil under her boots, the shape of the land that had taken her in and asked her to stand. She passed the garden, half trampled but still stubbornly green, and paused by the cottonwood tree at the edge of the property. She touched its bark like a pulse. That night, she told Callum she wanted to be married truly this time. He blinked at her. "You sure I've been left before? I've been mocked, ghosted, and forgotten. But not here, not by you." He looked down at his calloused hands. "I never asked you because I didn't want to risk you saying no." She stepped forward, took his hand. "I'm saying yes." They didn't send invitations. They didn't need to. Word spread fast in Tombstone, and the town that once laughed at the woman left at the altar now watched her walk into the chapel a second time. The same dress, mended dirt-stained proud. The veil pinned with a sheriff's badge she'd picked off a fallen gunman. Emmett stood beside Callum as best man, fidgeting with his collar and blinking against the light pouring through the stained glass window. The preacher asked the questions, voice shaking slightly. Callum answered with a voice like worn leather. Addie's answer came quieter, but no less certain. "Yes," she said. "To the roof, the work, the dust, and the danger." "I do." When the preacher declared them husband and wife, no one clapped at first. Then, a woman from the back, Callum's older neighbor, Miss Ruth, began to applaud, slow and steady. The sound built rising like wind across the hills. For the first time since her first wedding day, Adelaide Monroe smiled without reserve. They didn't have a reception, just a ride back home in the wagon, her hand resting lightly on his. Emmett chattered about how grown-up he felt. "It's like I got two parents now," he said, "even if one used to shoot coyotes before breakfast." That night, they sat by the fire, the house still humming with the echo of vows. Addie laid her head on Callum's shoulder. "You know this ain't a happy ending," she said. "It's just the middle." "I know. But it's the best damn middle I've had." In the weeks that followed, peace came like rainfall on cracked ground, slow but persistent. Addie kept her routines. She sang while chopping vegetables. She taught Emmett how to patch a shirt and how to listen for lies in a man's voice. She baked bread that reminded Callum of summers long gone. Then came the coughing. At first, it was light, just a tickle. She blamed the dust, the ash from the barn fire, the dry wind. But one morning, Callum found blood in the cloth she'd tucked away in her apron. She said nothing, just folded it and looked out the window. That night she whispered to him, "Not today, not soon, but someday." He squeezed her hand. "Then we've still got time." But time doesn't listen. One morning, as the sun painted gold across the prairie, a rider came fast down the trail. It was the preacher's wife. Pale, breathless. "He's back," she gasped. "A lawman, name's Harrow. Says he's here to settle debts left in Prescott." Callum's face turned to stone. Addie stood slowly. "He's not law," Callum said. "He's revenge with a badge." Addie didn't flinch. "Then we'll meet him same as the others." Later that day, she pulled her wedding dress from the hook, ran her fingers over the seams. "I wore this for a promise," she said. "Let's keep making it real." Callum stood behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "This home we built, it's worth every bullet and bruise." She turned to face him. Then, let's show them what happens when they come for what's ours. That night, the stars blinked cold and distant above the ranch. A storm of dust was building beyond the hills, carried by the hooves of justice, or something wearing its mask. And in the heart of the desert, two people held on to each other, blood in the dust, fire in their veins, love stitched tight across every wound they'd ever survived. Dawn rose blood-red on the edge of the world. The air was brittle, cracked open by frost and nerves. The land around the Reeves Ranch held its breath. Adelaide Monroe stood at the window, pale light brushing across her face, and folded one more letter. Her handwriting was steady even as her fingers curled with ache. She slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and scrawled one word across the front, Emmett. Behind her, Callum packed the last of their supplies. Bullets, jerky bandages. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent too long pretending violence wouldn't return. Addie didn't watch him. She just listened. The creak of leather, the rasp of metal, the silence where promises once lived. "I want to be buried by the cottonwood," she said. Callum stopped. "Don't say that. Say it or not, it's coming." He walked over, took her face in his hands. "Not today." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "Maybe not, but soon." They stood like that for a long while until a sound broke through the crunch of boots outside. Emmett burst in, breathless. "He's here, and he's not alone." Callum grabbed his rifle. Addie reached for hers. Harrow rode in with 4 deputies, and the kind of smile that meant blood was already a foregone conclusion. "Callum Reeves," he called. "You are under arrest for desertion, murder, and conspiracy." "You're no marshal," Callum replied from the porch. "No," Harrow said. "But I have the badge now, and out here that's all that matters." Addie stepped beside Callum's rifle cradled against her chest. "She's part of this too," Harrow said. "Helped Trigg, shot federal men. You both think you're legends. You'll die like bandits." Addie's voice was iron. "You want this land. You want our blood. Come and earn it." The standoff broke in a blink. A shot rang out and chaos erupted. Gunfire split the morning silence, tearing through fences, hitting wood dirt, flesh. Addie dropped to her knee, fired clean through a deputy's thigh. Callum covered the side flank, shooting fast, and furious sweat pouring down his temples. Harrow moved through the fray like a man possessed, shouting orders, firing wild. Emmett stayed low in the crawl space, but when one deputy circled the house, he leapt out, firing his little pistol into the air. "Hey!" he shouted. The man turned surprised, and Addie struck him down with the butt of her rifle. Blood soaked into the earth. Harrow shot toward the porch, yelling. "You should have run, Reeves." Addie was hit. The bullet grazed her ribs. She fell, not from pain, but surprise. Callum knelt beside her. "You still breathing?" She grimaced. "Only just. Go finish it." He rose like a storm. Harrow and Callum met in the middle of the yard, 2 men with too many ghosts behind them. Fists, then steel. Harrow's shot missed. Callum's didn't. The fake lawman dropped gasping in the dust. "You think you won?" he rasped. "You'll always be hunted. You're a ghost in this world, Reeves." Callum lowered the revolver. "Maybe. But at least I built something worth haunting." He turned back to Addie. She lay against the porch, eyes open but fading. He dropped beside her, gathered her up. "Stay," he whispered. "Don't leave yet." "I'm not scared," she said. "Not anymore." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You made me more than a man with a gun." She smiled faintly. "You made me more than a ghost in a dress." And then she was gone. The wind picked up. The town said nothing for days. They buried Adelaide Monroe beneath the cottonwood tree, the same tree she'd once leaned against, boots caked in dirt, and a heart too full of stories. Her headstone was simple. Her name, and beneath it, she stayed when it mattered. Emmett placed the letter she wrote him at the base, sealed with twine. It said what only a mother would know to say to a boy like him: how to keep going, how to remember without drowning, how to be a good man in a hard world. Callum didn't speak at the funeral. He just stood, hat clutched in hand, face unreadable. Weeks passed, then months. The ranch kept on. Emmett grew taller, louder, then quieter again. The scars on Callum's hands never quite faded. He took to talking to Addie at dusk, sitting by the cottonwood tree. "You'd hate the way I let the goats wander," he said one evening, "and Emmett still won't eat carrots." Sometimes he swore he could hear her laugh in the breeze. Years later, travelers came through and asked about the ranch with the White House and the kid who shot coyotes. The locals would nod, point the way. "That's Reeves' place," they'd say, "and that cottonwood. That's where the woman who saved him rests. They say she was a bride once, and a warrior always. Legends aren't always born in battle. Sometimes they're made in kitchens under stormy skies beside men who forgot how to hope until someone showed them how. And in the dust of the Wild West, beneath a cottonwood that blooms just a little earlier each spring, the name Adelaide Monroe still whispers in the wind. Because some stories never die. They root, they rise, and they remain." Months after Adelaide Monroe's death, the Reeves Ranch had settled into a steady rhythm. Callum worked with a quiet resolve. Emmett grew leaner and stronger, and the cottonwood tree stood sentinel over them both. But peace like prairie grass was fragile, and one day it cracked wide open. A telegram arrived, delivered by a writer in a brown duster. The envelope bore no return name, only a government seal. Callum read it once, then again, eyes narrowing with each word. Emmett watched from the corner of the porch, sensing the storm behind his father's silence. "What is it?" Callum didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Addie had a brother." Emmett blinked. She never said. She thought he was dead. Turns out he wasn't. He's coming here. 3 days later, Elijah Monroe arrived at the ranch. He didn't ride a horse, but a military carriage. He wore a tailored coat and boots that hadn't touched dirt in years. His face was pale smooth, a city man, but his eyes held the same haunted depth as his sister's. "I came to collect her things," he said after a stiff handshake with Callum, "and see what kind of place she chose over her family." "She chose us," Callum replied. "That should be enough." Elijah's smile was brittle. "Let's see if it is." Over the next week, Elijah inspected everything. He asked about Addie's routines, her last words, her rifle, her dress. He stood at her grave for nearly an hour, unmoving. That night at dinner, he dropped a question like a hammer. "Do you know she had a child before?" The silence shattered. Emmett looked up, startled. What? Callum stiffened. "She never told me. She gave birth before she ever came." "West," Elijah said. "Boy, father long gone." The child was taken in by an orphanage in Memphis. She wrote once. Never got a reply. She thought he died, but he didn't. He enlisted. He's missing now somewhere south of the border, maybe in a prison camp. Callum's voice was low. "Why are you telling us this? Because I intend to find him, but I can't do it alone." Emmett leaned forward. "He's my brother." Elijah hesitated, half, but maybe that still matters. Callum stood, walked out onto the porch, stared at the stars. Addie had once said every person she'd buried left a part of her hollow. Now, here was a piece of her she'd thought lost, suddenly resurrected. Later that night, Emmett found Callum by the cottonwood. "Are we going after him?" Callum nodded slowly. "We are. You, me, and Elijah. If there's a piece of her out there still breathing, we don't let him stay lost." And just like that, the story widened. The next morning, they packed the saddlebags, saddled the horses, and left the ranch in the care of Miss Ruth. The wind carried them south toward borderlands that didn't care much for names or flags. Three men, bound by one woman's memory, rode into the unknown. Because in the Wild West, some stories don't end, they only deepen. If this story moved, you stirred something in your chest, or made you believe again in quiet strength, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, tales of dust, love fire, and everything that lives between. Your support helps us keep the frontier alive.